despair, not the best man. Harry explains that on the eve of the wedding, he and his brother had dinner at Clarence's house with their father, and William's two best men were there, James and Thomas. Harry recounts that the public had been told that he was the best man, but it was a barefaced lie. The public expected him to be best man, and the palace saw no choice but to say that was the case. But it would appear that William didn't want him to be best man because he didn't think it was safe putting the mic in his hands. And it wasn't a decision that Harry necessarily disagreed with. So consequently, why try and suggest that there was something underhand going by saying, oh, it's a blatant lie? Of course, just fits with his narrative of saying, don't believe everything that you're told in terms of what's put out by way of press release, which of course also goes for what he tells us. The fact also apparently was done because it was to cover for the best men so that they wouldn't have been chased down by the press. Harry suggesting that they would have been tracked down by the press, been hacked, investigated, and their families' lives would have been ruined. And both the individuals who were William's best men were actually quite shy, and therefore the experience would have ruined them. I'm not sure the press would have been that interested in them. They would have done some pieces, I suppose, on who the best men were, and then once the wedding was over, would have moved on. So to suggest that they would necessarily be ruined is perhaps a little bit melodramatic. And William explained all of this to Harry, and they had a chat laughing about all of the supposedly inappropriate things that Harry might say. And he said that the pre-wedding dinner was rather pleasant, and that he had a couple of rum and cokes to settle his pre-wedding nerves. And Harry explained what it had been like in the North Pole, with his tales from there, though they can't have been particularly interesting or numerous, seeing as he couldn't be bothered to share them with his readership in the preceding chapter, as I've mentioned. Perhaps he decided he'd go into greater detail when he was talking to his family. Apparently his father was sympathetic about the frostnip ears and cheeks, and Harry said he didn't tell him about his equally tender penis. So he decides that it's not appropriate to tell his dad that, but feels that it's appropriate to tell the world, and now of course his dad knows as a consequence of this. And he then goes on to explain, as we've already been told as a consequence of the leakage previously, about the fact that he had a problem with his todger, which wasn't healing. And he then starts to say that his penis was a matter of public record and indeed some public curiosity. I can safely say that until such time as it has invaded my consciousness as a consequence of the leaks, I have never, not once, not ever, contemplated Prince Harry's dick. I have not once envisaged what it looks like, the depth and thickage of the fantapubes surrounding it. It has never been something that has invaded my consciousness. And therefore to suggest that his penis was a matter of some public curiosity suggests that actually you're the one that's obsessed with your cock, Harry, and obsessed with what people think about it. And most people have never ever thought to themselves, I wonder what Prince Harry's knob is like. Can you see the scene that Mr. and Mrs. Wilson are sat down having breakfast on a Saturday morning? He's there buttering his crumpets, not a euphemism by the way. Mrs. Wilson is bringing over a pot of tea. He picks up the newspaper and then he turns to his wife and he says, "Darling, have you ever thought about Prince Harry's knob?" Mrs. Wilson says, "Well, funnily enough, I was only in Sainsbury's the other day debating whether to buy lamb chops or pork chops, and it occurred to me as I gazed over at the chipolata section, I wonder what Harry's knob is like." "Yes," says Mr. Wilson. "Let's find out whether young Mary has thought about it also." So they decide to call Mary, their daughter, who's away at university in Glasgow studying medicine. She wants to be a doctor. perhaps she'll be a doctor of dickology, that she wants to be a professor of penis studies. Mr. Wilson rings his daughter. "Good morning, darling, how are you?" His daughter's a little bit bleary-eyed after a heavy night the night before at the Friday night disco at her student union, undoubtedly. "What is it, Dad?" "I'm just wondering, have you ever thought about Prince Harry's penis?" "Do I think Prince Harry is a penis?" she says, as a consequence of the line breaking up slightly. No. Have you ever thought about Prince Harry's penis?" Actually, it's funny you should mention that, but only the other day I was there moulding someone's genitalia as part of plastic surgery reconstructive work. And I thought to myself, because I was using orange clay, I wonder if this is similar to what Prince Harry's penis looks like. "You see," Mr. Wilson says triumphantly, "we've all been thinking about Prince Harry's penis. So maybe the Ginger Prince is right. Maybe it is a matter of public curiosity and I have that wrong." Apparently, there were countless stories in books and papers about him and William not being circumcised, and that apparently their mother had forbidden them to be circumcised. Absolutely fascinating. So this dunderhead can't tell us about the stories of the people that he was trekking in the North Pole with, but finds it entirely appropriate to dedicate time talking about the state of his penis and the fact that he wasn't circumcised and people's fascination with that. Then, after dinner, they watched television and saw footage of people who were camping outside Clarence's house in the hopes of getting a front row seat, and they went to the window. How about that, hey? You can look on your TV and then go and see the real thing. And you could see that there were thousands of people, and that they were cooking meals and chatting and celebrating as if they were getting married in the morning. Willie suggested that we should go and see them, but his security team said no. And he said, no, I think it's the right thing to do. And basically, Harry thinks this is all as a consequence of the rum hitting him and that he needed a wingman. So the two of them went out and shook hands, and people wished William well, and they said they loved him, loved Kate. And then, of course, he has to bring it back to his mother. They gave us both the same teary smiles, the same looks of fondness and pity we'd seen that day in August 1997. And he explains that there was no way of avoiding the echo of his worst day, our worst day. And he thought that William was rather tipsy and that they both needed a rest. And then, when he went to collect his brother the next day, he said it looked as though William hadn't slept a wink. He said he was fine, but apparently he wasn't. And he said he was wearing the bright red uniform of the Irish Guards, not his household cavalry frock coat uniform. And he wondered if that was the matter. And apparently he'd asked the Queen if he could wear his household cavalry kit, and she'd said no. And as the heir, he must wear the number 1 ceremonial. And apparently William was a bit glum in having so little say in what he was to get married. But I don't remember William running off to the papers and causing a big hullaboo about it, like Harry's wife did, of course, because she didn't get the tiara that she wanted. Harry said he looked very smart, and then he explained that he didn't feel particularly smart or comfortable in his Blues and Royals uniform. He explained, "I'd never worn it before and hope not to wear it again anytime soon." I'm sure the Blues and Royals are delighted to hear Prince Harry saying that about him. He explained that it had huge shoulder pads and huge cuffs, and he could imagine people saying, "Who's this idiot?" Well, I think they'd be saying that to you about you anyway, Harry, as opposed to as a consequence of your reputation of not being particularly bright, and therefore, as a consequence of that, people would be taking the view that you're not particularly clever. So there we are. He then explains that they climb into a Bentley, and he then confronted William, saying that he reeked of rum, and gave him some mints. And then they arrived at Westminster Abbey, and then they went inside, and they said that then he makes reference to, "We were soldiers, grown men, but walking with the same tentative boyish gait as when we trailed Mummy's coffin." And then he has more memories of his mother's funeral, and He says it was still so hard to think of Mummy in the realm of death. Mummy who danced with Travolta, who quarrelled with Elton, who dazzled the Reagans. Could she really be in the great beyond with the spirits of Newton and Chaucer? So even on his brother's wedding day, he has to keep bringing up his dead mum. I suppose, of course, he's relaying what went on. Those were the thoughts that he had, and he's sharing them. But it does show the level of preoccupation. And then he explains that he managed to find the ring, and that he couldn't have lost the ring even if he'd wanted to. He handed it over, and he says he doesn't recall thereafter the readings or removing the ring or giving it to his brother. He says he remembers Kate walking down the aisle looking incredible. I wonder if he went, wow. And I guess he's managed to sneak that into the book without his handler noticing that, because she certainly wouldn't be pleased about him saying that. And then he explains that he loved his new sister-in-law. I felt she was more sister than in-law, the sister I never had and always wanted. And I was pleased that she'd forever be standing by Willie's side. She was a good match for my older brother. They made each other visibly happy, and therefore I was happy too. Which shows his empathic traits once again. But also he's managed to evidently sneak that in without Harry's wife knowing about it, because again, she would not be very pleased about him speaking in such favourable terms about the nemesis. Thereafter, he then mentions he couldn't help but feel, though, that it was a farewell, that he was effectively losing his brother. And he talks about having the same feeling that when his father got married. He then talks about identity being a hierarchy, and then there's some bits which are clearly inserted by the ghost writer about evolution and maturation, the path towards wisdom. It's all natural and healthy, but there's a purity to childhood which is diluted with each iteration. Yeah, clearly not the thoughts of Harry, and have been inserted by the ghost writer. And he felt that William had moved on. He talks about him being the Duke of Cambridge, and he talks about that his reaction to all of this was somewhat reminiscent of what he'd felt the first time he got in a helicopter. And then he asked the question, what was the universe out to prove by taking my penis at the same moment it took my brother? The fuck? Yes. He basically says that he found himself terrifyingly alone because his brother had got married. His brother's not gone anywhere. He's now married. He wasn't living with Harry before, and he's no longer doing so. It's not like he's moving to, say, another country. It's not like he's decided not to have anything to do with his extended family and throw shit at them like you did, Harry. So all of this is rather melodramatic, and quite how he relates his brother being taken away when he's not to having his penis taken. One really does wonder what's going on inside that addled mind of Harry's. Anyway, at the reception, it was a case that William had told Harry that he was to be the compere, and brilliantly Harry had to go and look the word up as to what that meant. And then he explains the press reported on apparently his extensive preparations for the intro, and that he phoned Chels and tested some of his lines on her, and ultimately caving when he was told don't refer to Kate's killer legs, all of which he says is horseshit. He said that he wasn't in regular contact with Chels, and that was why William checked with her beforehand to check if it was okay to invite her to the wedding, because he didn't want either of them feeling uncomfortable. Harry explains he tested a few lines on JLP, but mostly he winged it, and he talks about childhood and a few silly stories from there. And he recounts the things that he had explained, and ultimately he then talks about his mum, saying she'd have loved to have been there, and she'd have loved Kate, and that she'd have loved seeing the love that the two of them have found together. So fond and affectionate words from Harry on his brother's wedding day. So he goes into quite a lot of detail about it, though of course much of it is all about reminiscing about his mother, which to some extent is understandable, but continues the theme and again reinforces the fact that I made earlier, that it would have been advantageous if he'd written a separate book about his mother. Well, from going from not the best man onto Dr. Dick, no, it's not the young lady that I put in a fictional representation of people talking about Harry's knob, but somebody else. Join me in the next video to find out more.